The first punch was not with fists, but with words. "You people never learn, do you?" The officer's sneer cut sharper than any blow, leaving the crowded station frozen, a silence heavier than the sound of bones breaking. Marcus had heard slurs before. He grew up with them carved into his school desk and whispered behind his back in staff meetings. But here, in uniformed mouths dripping with authority, the venom turned lethal. He wanted to laugh because laughter had always been his shield, but the cuffs around his wrists bit too deep, leaving him somewhere between fury and humiliation. Marcus Bell was 32, a high school literature teacher who spent his days convincing kids from the South Side that words could save them. He was tall, lean, his tie usually knotted too tightly, and his smile a little too quick, as though he had to prove to the world he was harmless before the world proved otherwise. Tonight, that smile had been beaten out of him, along with the illusion that teaching Shakespeare could shield him from the brutality of skin-deep judgment. The arrest had been absurd. He was walking home from grading essays at a cafe, papers in his satchel, when flashing lights washed over him like a predator's glare. Suspicious, they called him. Fits the description, they said. The description, as always, was black, male, breathing. Within minutes, he was pressed against a squad car. The words, "I'm a teacher," ignored, his ID tossed aside, as if it were a counterfeit excuse for existing. Inside the station, humiliation became theater. Officers paraded him past their colleagues, laughing at the thought of a teacher in cuffs, one muttering how kids these days probably learn better with fear than books. Every jeer echoed, each word chiseling at the foundation of his dignity. Marcus kept replaying his mother's advice in his head. Never let them see you lose yourself. Your silence is sometimes your strongest weapon. But tonight, silence tasted like ash. What Marcus did not know, not yet, was that the woman in the navy suit standing at the far end of the station, the one whose presence silenced even the cockiest officers, was Senator Eleanor Grant, the newly elected official tasked with reforming the very force that now dangled his humanity like a puppet on strings. She had arrived unannounced, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a metronome of justice. No one expected her, least of all Marcus, who at that moment was shoved into a chair under the harsh interrogation light, the smell of stale coffee and sweat suffocating him. She watched, hidden for a moment behind tinted glass, her jaw tightening as the insults escalated. She saw the way his shoulders squared, not from strength, but from survival, and something in her chest clenched, because she remembered. She remembered being the daughter of a black soldier spat on after returning from war. She remembered filing lawsuits that were laughed out of court. And now, here she stood, the system's overseer, staring at the ugliness she was supposed to tame. The irony was almost cruel. Marcus, stripped of dignity, spat on by the system, had no idea that the very person with the power to change his fate was in the room. His humiliation was not just a mistake, it was a revelation. He tried to keep his breathing steady as Officer Doyle leaned across the table, his voice a low growl. "What's your game, huh? Walking around this neighborhood at night, thinking you're better than us? You think a tie makes you less of a threat?" Marcus stared back, his eyes burning. "I think a tie makes me a teacher." The room laughed. The kind of laugh that made your skin crawl. Senator Grant's hand twitched at her side. She wanted to storm in, to tear down the walls of this theater of cruelty, but she knew timing was everything. Power, she had learned, was not in the volume of your voice, but in the weight of your silence until the moment came to strike. She let them dig their hole deeper, every insult another nail in their own coffin. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of his students' bright faces eager to be told they were more than statistics. He thought of Jamal, who had written an essay on how teachers were shields in a world full of arrows. Was he still a shield now, chained and mocked, or just another casualty proving his lessons naive? His heart ached at the thought that Monday morning there would be an empty chair at the front of the classroom, and rumors would spread about how Mr. Bell got locked up. The humiliation was unbearable, but what cut deepest was the awareness that this was not new. This was history repeating itself, the chorus of centuries where black bodies were dragged, chained, displayed as warnings. Marcus had read those stories in textbooks. Now he was living one. And yet, beneath the crushing weight of despair, a spark remained. Not hope. Hope felt dangerous tonight, but defiance. He would not beg. He would not break. He lifted his chin, met Doyle's smirk, and said softly, "You're afraid of me. That's why I'm here." The silence that followed was different. For a second, even the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker. It was in that silence that Senator Grant finally stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of an entire nation. "That's enough." Every officer turned, their bravado collapsing as they registered who she was. Marcus blinked, disoriented, as the woman in the sharp suit approached, golden light from the window haloing her figure. She looked at him not as a suspect, not as a statistic, but as a man. And in that gaze, Marcus felt both exposed and seen, as though the weight of his humiliation was simultaneously acknowledged and challenged. He did not know her name yet. He did not know that the woman standing before him was the senator who had fought tooth and nail to oversee police reform, that she was both judge and witness in this cruel performance. All he knew was that the air had shifted, and for the first time that night, the officers looked afraid. And that, Marcus realized, was a beginning. Senator Grant's voice was not loud, but it was lethal. The officers stiffened as though a blade had been drawn across the room. Doyle's smirk faltered, confusion flashing across his face before shame quickly disguised itself as hostility. "Senator, what are you?" I said. "That's enough." Her words carved the air clean, leaving no room for interpretation. She stepped closer to Marcus, the golden light following her like an ally, illuminating his bruised wrists, the cracked dignity in his eyes. Marcus stared at her, trying to piece together who this stranger was and why her presence carried such gravity. She looked directly at him, her expression unreadable, and then turned to Doyle with the kind of composure that made even the boldest bully shrink. "You will release him," she said. Doyle's jaw tightened. "With respect, Senator, this man," she interrupted, her gaze sharp as glass, "was walking home with a bag of essays. He was arrested for fitting the description, which means you arrested him for existing. Do you realize the liability you've created for your department? Do you understand the depth of your failure?" The station, once a cacophony of mockery and arrogance, had become a cathedral of silence. Marcus could hear his own pulse, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, the shift of boots against the tile. Something had changed not just in the room, but in the balance of power itself. Still, Marcus did not speak. He wasn't sure if silence was his shield anymore, or if it was simply exhaustion pressing against his throat. He sat there, cuffs biting, watching the theater unfold, wondering whether this woman was savior, opportunist, or something in between. Doyle, unwilling to bow without a fight, tried again. "Senator, with all due respect, we were doing our jobs. Crime's been up in this neighborhood, and so you solve crime by arresting a teacher." Her voice snapped like a whip. "You call this protection? You call this justice? I call it harassment, intimidation, and humiliation. And I am the one who will write the laws that decide whether this station keeps its funding, Officer Doyle. So choose your words very carefully." The room exhaled, collective tension unraveling in uneasy gasps. A young officer in the corner shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking from Doyle to the senator, as though realizing for the first time that the script he'd been reciting his whole career might be collapsing. Marcus lowered his gaze to the table. For a moment, he felt an almost childlike relief, like the moment in class when a principal walked in just as a bully was about to strike. But relief was dangerous. He'd learned that too many times before. The system was not built for his safety. Even this moment of defense might evaporate if politics demanded it. Grant leaned toward Doyle, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "Take the cuffs off him. Now." Reluctantly, Doyle pulled a key from his belt and unlocked the chains. The clink of metal against metal was small, but to Marcus, it was thunder. His wrists, raw and red, trembled as the weight disappeared, but the marks remained. He rubbed them gently, feeling the sting of freedom. "Mr. Bell," Grant said, turning toward him for the first time with deliberate gentleness. "I'm sorry." It was such a simple phrase, 2 words he had never expected to hear in a police station, and it nearly undid him. His throat tightened. He wanted to answer, but the words tangled in his chest, trapped behind years of swallowing pain. He managed only a nod. "Would you like to press charges?" she asked softly. The question landed like a hammer. He looked at her, then at the circle of officers watching him, some ashamed, some furious, all waiting. If he said yes, he knew what would follow. Retaliation, rumors, the quiet sabotage of his reputation. If he said no, he would walk free tonight, but carry this scar in silence. It was the same impossible choice black men had faced for generations: justice or survival. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. His students' faces flashed before him: Jamal, Tanya, Luis, kids who watched every move he made, who measured their sense of worth against his. What would he be teaching them if he stayed silent? I don't know yet, Marcus said, his voice hoarse but steady. Grant nodded, her eyes steady, as though she understood the storm inside him. You don't have to decide tonight. But know this: what happened here will not vanish. I will make sure of it. The room shifted again, her promise cutting through the fog of complicity. Doyle muttered something under his breath, but Grant's glare silenced him before the words could form. Marcus stood, his knees unsteady. For the first time that night, he was no longer an object, no longer evidence, no longer a suspect. He was a man reclaiming his breath. He picked up his satchel from the floor, the scattered papers still inside, creased and smudged but intact. The essays his students had poured their hearts into felt heavier now, as if they too had been witnesses to his ordeal. As he turned toward the exit, Senator Grant fell into step beside him. The golden light spilled through the glass doors, washing away the station's fluorescent gloom. For a brief second, Marcus let it warm his face, imagining it could burn away the humiliation still clinging to his skin. Outside, the city hummed with its usual indifference. Cars passed, neon signs flickered, and people hurried along sidewalks, unaware of the storm that had raged inside the station. Marcus inhaled deeply, the air sharp in his lungs, and finally allowed himself to speak. Why? He asked, his voice quiet but weighted. Why step in for me? Grant looked at him, her expression softening. Because I've been where you are. And because now I have the power to make sure fewer people go through what you just did. He studied her, searching for cracks in her sincerity. You don't even know me. I don't need to know you, she replied. I know the pattern, and I know it has to end. They walked in silence for a few steps, the city's noise filling the space between them. Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the fragile thread of justice she had extended. But cynicism was a hard habit to break. Words are easy, he said finally, bitterness slipping through. Change isn't. Grant didn't flinch. You're right. But words are where change begins. And you, of all people, should understand the power of that. The reminder stung. She was right. Built his life around words, teaching his students that literature could transform worlds, that language was the first step toward liberation. Tonight, those same words had nearly been stolen from him. And yet, here he was, still speaking, still resisting. They reached the corner where their paths would diverge. Marcus adjusted his satchel, feeling the weight of his papers, his lessons, his dignity stitched back together with trembling threads. Thank you, he said, the words reluctant but sincere. Grant nodded once, firmly. Don't thank me yet. Hold me accountable instead. Then she turned, her silhouette glowing beneath the streetlights, and disappeared into the night. Marcus stood there, frozen between despair and possibility. The humiliation still lingered, but so did something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the faintest outline of it. He walked home, each step heavy, each shadow whispering reminders of how fragile safety was. When he finally reached his apartment, he dropped his satchel on the couch, collapsed into the chair by the window, and let the silence settle. His wrists throbbed, his chest ached, but his mind replayed every detail of the night: the sneers, the cuffs, the senator's voice slicing through the darkness. He opened his satchel, pulled out the top essay, and began to read. The words blurred, his vision clouded by exhaustion and anger, but he kept reading. Because words were all he had left, and if he let them go, then the officers had won. By the time dawn broke, Marcus was still at the window, still reading. The city outside awoke in streaks of gold, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he let himself whisper into the quiet, "This isn't over." Marcus dragged himself through the following days like a man walking through water. Every step felt weighted, every interaction tinged with a strange new vulnerability. The bruises on his wrists faded quickly, but the invisible bruises, the laughter in that station, the heat of humiliation, the memory of Doyle's sneer clung stubbornly to his spirit. At school, he stood in front of his students as though nothing had happened, but they sensed it. Teenagers always did. Mr. Bell, you okay? Tanya asked after class one morning, lingering by her desk as the others filed out. Marcus forced a smile. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Tanya frowned. You're smiling with your mouth, not your eyes. He wanted to laugh at her bluntness, but couldn't. Instead, he patted the stack of essays on his desk. Maybe I'm just tired of Shakespeare's tragedies. They hit too close to home these days. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded and left. When the room was empty, Marcus sank into his chair, his head in his hands. He knew he couldn't hide forever. That evening, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Mr. Bell. The voice was steady, authoritative. He recognized it instantly. Senator Grant. A pause. I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to check on you. He let the silence stretch. I'm surviving, he said finally. I've initiated an inquiry, she said. What happened at that station will not be swept under the rug. Her certainty both comforted and unsettled him. You really think anything will change? You'll write a report, they'll get a slap on the wrist, and next month some other kid will be sitting in that chair with cuffs on. Not if we make it bigger than a report, she countered. Bigger how? Public, she said simply. The word landed like a stone in his chest. Public meant exposure. Public meant headlines, scrutiny, threats. He thought of his students, of his mother's trembling hands when she watched the news. Public meant his life would never be the same. I don't want to be anyone's symbol, he said. And yet, you already are, Grant replied gently. The question is whether you want that symbol to stand for silence or for change. He hung up without answering. But her words stayed, gnawing at him long into the night. The next week, everything shifted. A video surfaced. Grainy footage from inside the station, recorded secretly by a rookie officer whose conscience had cracked under the weight of what he saw. The video spread like wildfire. Marcus being shoved into a chair, Doyle's sneer, the laughter, the words, "You people never learn." Marcus's world exploded overnight. Reporters camped outside his school. Protesters gathered in front of the station, chanting his name. Parents called, some offering support, others demanding he keep politics out of the classroom. His inbox overflowed with hate mail and love letters alike, strangers turning his pain into their battleground. At school, the principal pulled him aside. Marcus, maybe you should take some time off. The attention, no. Marcus cut in. The kids need me here. But truthfully, he needed them. The classroom was his only anchor, the one place where he could still be Marcus Bell, the teacher, not Marcus Bell, the headline. Senator Grant called again. The committee is convening next week, she said. They'll hear testimony about the police force. I want you there. Marcus laughed bitterly. You want me to sit in front of politicians and relive the worst night of my life. I want you to sit in front of politicians and remind them why their decisions matter, she corrected. You don't have to do this. But if you do, it won't just be for you. It'll be for everyone who doesn't get the chance to speak. Her conviction was infuriating, because part of him wanted to say yes. Part of him wanted to stand in that room and throw the system's cruelty back in its face. But another part, the larger part, wanted to disappear, to crawl back into anonymity and let the world forget his name. Days blurred together until the hearing arrived. Marcus didn't decide until the morning of, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, tie in hand, his students' essays scattered across the sink. One essay in particular caught his eye, Jamal's piece about teachers as shields. He read the line again. A shield doesn't choose the battle chooses the shield. And Marcus knew. The committee room was packed, cameras lining the walls, reporters scribbling, politicians whispering behind folders. Senator Grant sat at the center, her posture regal, her eyes steady as he entered. She gave him a subtle nod. When his name was called, Marcus rose. His legs felt like stone, but his voice, when it came, was clear. My name is Marcus Bell. I'm a teacher. He told them everything. The flashing lights, the cuffs, the jeers, the humiliation. He spoke of history, of patterns, of students who feared walking home with backpacks because backpacks could be mistaken for weapons. He did not cry, though his throat burned. He did not beg, though his wrists still ached. He simply told the truth. When he finished, the room was silent. Cameras clicked. Politicians shifted uncomfortably. One senator cleared his throat and asked, Mr. Bell, what do you want us to do? Marcus paused. I want you to stop pretending this is about bad apples. It's about the tree, and I want you to plant a new one." The words echoed long after the session ended. Reporters replayed them on every channel. Protesters painted them on signs. Students scrawled them in notebooks. But change, Marcus soon learned, was slower than applause. The police union lashed out, calling him a liar. Anonymous letters appeared in his mailbox, filled with threats. Some parents pulled their kids from his class, claiming he was too political. One evening, his mother called, her voice trembling. "Baby, maybe you should step back? They're coming after you." "I can't," he said softly. "If I step back now, what was the point?" Still, the weight was crushing him. Nights were sleepless, days a blur of teaching and defending and surviving. He began to wonder if he had made a mistake, if speaking out had simply painted a target on his back without changing anything. Then one afternoon, as he packed up his classroom, Jamal approached him. The boy held a notebook, his eyes wide with something like awe. "Mr. Bell," he said, voice shaking, "I watched you on TV. I saw what you said, and I just wanted you to know I want to be a teacher now. Like you." Marcus stared at him, stunned. "Why?" "Because shields don't choose the battle," Jamal said, echoing his own essay. "But they can protect people. And you protected me, even if you didn't know it." Tears blurred Marcus's vision. For the first time in weeks, the heaviness lifted, just slightly. That night, he called Senator Grant. "I'm not done," he told her. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes, I'm in." There was a long pause on the other end. Then her steady reply. "Good. Because the fight is just beginning." And Marcus realized she was right. His humiliation had been the spark. But sparks only mattered if they lit fires. The protests grew louder with each passing week. What began as a single viral video of Marcus Bell in a police station had transformed into marches that stretched across the city, chants echoing through streets like thunder rolling in from a long-awaited storm. His name was painted on cardboard, printed on shirts, whispered in prayer circles, debated in newsrooms. To Marcus, it was surreal, like watching his own life pulled from his body and turned into a banner he hadn't asked to carry. But there was no turning back. Senator Grant called him into her office one evening after the hearings. The sun had set, leaving only the golden lamplight glowing across her desk. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "They're pushing back harder than ever," she said. "The union's rallying, the mayor's under pressure, and the department is in damage control. They're calling you a liar, an agitator. They're calling me a traitor." Marcus swallowed. "And you?" "I've been called worse," she said dryly, then softened. "But this is bigger than us. The legislation I'm drafting could change everything. Independent oversight, mandatory cameras, training reforms, accountability that sticks." "And what do you need from me?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "Your voice," she said. "Your story. People listen to you in a way they don't listen to politicians. You humanize what they want to dismiss as statistics." He looked down at his hands, the faint scars around his wrists still visible. He thought of his students, of Jamal saying he wanted to become a teacher because of him. He thought of his mother, begging him to step back. He thought of Doyle's sneer, the laughter that had stripped him raw. "Okay," he said finally, "but I'm not doing this for politics. I'm doing this because I don't want any of my kids sitting in that chair next." Grant nodded, her eyes glinting with something like respect. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Marcus spoke at town halls, at rallies, at vigils for victims whose names had been forgotten by the news cycle, but not by their families. He was nervous every time, but his words carried weight because they came from truth, not ambition. He told them what it felt like to be reduced to a color in the eyes of the law. He told them what it meant to carry humiliation like a second skin. And people listened. But not everyone listened kindly. One night, as Marcus walked home from a community meeting, he noticed headlights trailing too close. He turned down a side street. The car followed. His heart pounded. Finally, the car slowed, and a window rolled down. "Hey, teacher," a voice sneered from the darkness. "Better watch yourself. Shields break too." The car sped off, leaving Marcus frozen on the sidewalk, breath sharp in his chest. He told no one, not even Grant. He didn't want to give fear the satisfaction of being named. Yet the threats only hardened his resolve. When the day of the Senate vote arrived, Marcus sat in the gallery above, watching the chamber fill with suits and briefcases, with whispers and cameras. Senator Grant rose to speak, her voice steady, her words slicing through decades of excuses. She invoked Marcus's story not to exploit, but to illuminate. She spoke of children who deserved to see their teachers safe, of citizens who deserved dignity, of a future that demanded courage. The debate dragged on for hours. Opponents barked about budgets, about handcuffing the police, about Marcus being an unreliable witness. Supporters countered with statistics, testimonies, moral imperatives. And through it all, Marcus sat, fists clenched, feeling as though the outcome would decide not just his fate, but the weight of every injustice carried by those who never made it to a Senate floor. Finally, the vote was called. One by one, senators pressed their buttons. Green lights and red lights blinked across the board. The chamber buzzed with tension. When the tally appeared 52 in favor, 48 against, Marcus exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The bill had passed. The gallery erupted in applause. Marcus sat frozen, tears burning his eyes, the moment almost too immense to absorb. Grant looked up at him from the floor, her expression fierce and proud. For the first time since that night in the station, Marcus felt the humiliation lift, not erased, but transformed, turned into something larger than pain, something that mattered. Yet the story did not end with a vote. Change never did. The reforms would take time, resistance would remain fierce, and Marcus knew the road ahead was long. But something had shifted. The system had been forced to look at itself in the mirror, and it was Marcus Bell's reflection staring back. In the months that followed, life slowly began to settle. The reporters thinned, the protests quieted, the legislation began its slow crawl into practice. Marcus returned fully to his classroom, determined to reclaim the normalcy that had been stolen from him. But he was not the same teacher anymore. He was sharper, more urgent, less willing to let silence shield his students from the truth. When he taught Baldwin and Morrison, he taught them not as relics, but as roadmaps. When he read poetry aloud, his voice carried not just cadence, but conviction. His students noticed. They leaned in closer. They asked harder questions. They began to see themselves not as shadows on society's edge, but as authors of its future. One afternoon, as he packed up his classroom, Jamal approached again. This time, he was smiling. "Mr. Bell," he said, "I signed up for the teaching prep program downtown. I'm going to do it." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He reached out, squeezing Jamal's shoulder. "Good. The world needs more shields." Jamal grinned. "No, Mr. Bell. The world needs more swords. But the kind that cut lies, not people." Marcus laughed, the sound full and unbroken. For the first time in what felt like years, it wasn't laughter as armor, it was laughter as release. Later that evening, he walked home as the sun dipped low, bathing the city in golden light. He passed the police station where it all began. The windows glinted, reflecting the fading sun, and for a moment he stopped. Memories surged, the cuffs, the jeers, the crushing weight of humiliation. But layered over those memories now was something else. The sound of a Senate chamber applauding, the sight of his students leaning forward, the echo of Grant's voice declaring that change was possible. He stood there, breathing deeply, and whispered to himself, "You didn't break me." The city buzzed around him, indifferent yet alive. He turned, shoulders straight, and kept walking, the golden light following like a promise. Marcus Bell had been humiliated. He had been mocked, threatened, nearly broken. But he had refused to stay silent. And in refusing, he had become more than a victim. He had become a teacher in the truest sense, not just of literature, but of resilience, dignity, and the unyielding demand for justice. The story was not over. But for tonight, he let himself believe that the future could be written differently. And as the sun sank into the horizon, painting the city in fire and gold, Marcus knew one truth with certainty. Humiliation had been the beginning, but dignity would be the ending. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.